J. Edgar Hoover, the Freemason legacy of America's top cop exposed. John Edgar Hoover was born on January 1, 1895 in Washington, D.C. He was the youngest of three children born to Dickerson Naylor Hoover and Annie Marie Scheitlin. The family lived in a modest home in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Hoover's father worked as a printer for the U.S. government printing office, instilling a sense of discipline and orderliness in young Edgar from an early age. Growing up, Hoover was a diligent and ambitious student. He attended Central High School, where his academic prowess shone through. He demonstrated a keen interest in law enforcement and aspired to serve his country. Fun fact: Hoover did not have a birth certificate filed upon his birth, although it was required in 1895 in Washington. Two of his siblings did have certificates, but Hoover's was not filed until 1938, when he was 43. In 1913, Hoover entered George Washington University, where he studied law and government. He graduated with a Bachelor of Laws degree in 1916 and embarked on a career in public service. His journey began when he was hired by the Library of Congress as a messenger, but his dedication and intelligence swiftly propelled him up the ranks. In 1917, during World War I, Hoover was recruited to work for the Department of Justice. His hard work and determination did not go unnoticed, and in 1924, at the young age of 29, he was appointed as the director of the Bureau of Investigation by President Calvin Coolidge. Hoover was the director of the BOI, the predecessor to the FBI, in 1924. After 11 years in the post, Hoover became instrumental in founding the FBI in June 1935. He remained as director for an additional 37 years until his death in May 1972, serving a total of 48 years leading both the BOI and the FBI and under 8 presidents. Throughout his tenure, Hoover was a controversial figure. He was known for his meticulousness, but also for his aggressive tactics and unchecked power. His authoritarian leadership style led to clashes with many political figures. Rumors swirled about his personal life, with speculation surrounding his relationships and alleged homosexuality. However, Hoover fiercely guarded his private life, and no concrete evidence emerged to substantiate these claims. Later in life, and after his death, Hoover became a controversial figure as evidence of his secretive abuses of power began to surface. He was also found to have routinely violated both the FBI's own policies and the very laws which the FBI was charged with enforcing, to have used the FBI to harass and sabotage political dissidents, to amass secret files for blackmailing high-level politicians. In the late 1930s, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, another Freemason, gave Hoover the task to investigate both foreign espionage in the United States and the activities of domestic communists and fascists. When the Cold War began in the late 1940s, the FBI under Hoover undertook the intensive surveillance of communists and other left-wing activists in the United States. The FBI also participated in the Venona Project, a pre-World War II joint project with the British to eavesdrop on Soviet spies in the UK and the United States. They did not initially realize that espionage was being committed, but the Soviets' multiple use of one-time pad ciphers, which with single use are unbreakable, created redundancies that allowed some intercepts to be decoded. These established that espionage was being carried out. Hoover kept the intercepts, America's greatest counterintelligence secret, in a locked safe in his office. He chose not to inform President Truman, yet another Freemason, and others while they held office. He informed the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, of the Venona Project in 1952. Don't forget to check out our episode on the Central Intelligence Agency and Freemasonry. Hoover was credited for overseeing several highly publicized captures or shootings of outlaws and bank robbers. These included those of Machine Gun Kelly in 1933, of Dillinger in 1934, and of Alvin Karpis in 1936, which led to the Bureau's powers being broadened. Also under Hoover's leadership, the FBI transformed into a formidable investigative agency. The Bureau tackled numerous high-profile cases, including the Lindbergh kidnapping in 1932, the pursuit of gangsters during the Prohibition era, and the dismantling of organized crime syndicates. By the way, Lindbergh was a Freemason too. During World War II, Hoover expanded the FBI's jurisdiction to counter espionage and sabotage activities. He established the FBI laboratory and implemented fingerprint analysis, pioneering forensic techniques that revolutionized law enforcement. Did you know the process for fingerprint analysis was also developed by a Freemason? Fingerprint classification was an essential development in forensic science. The ability to match fingerprints to an individual, made police tasks and litigation procedures 10 times easier. Sir Francis Galton, a Freemason, invented this concept. Now back to Hoover. The post-war era saw Hoover's focus shift towards combating communism and internal subversion. He initiated aggressive programs to identify and neutralize perceived threats to national security, leading to the controversial Red Scare. Beyond his professional life, Hoover was an active Freemason. He was initiated into Freemasonry at the age of 25 and maintained a strong affiliation with the Masonic order throughout his life. The principles of brotherhood, morality, and philanthropy resonated with Hoover, influencing his leadership style and values. Hoover was raised on November 9, 1920 in Federal Lodge No. 1 in Washington, D.C. He was a dedicated Mason and received a variety of honors from the fraternity. In 1955, Hoover was coroneted a 33rd degree Mason by the ancient accepted Scottish Rite Southern Masonic jurisdiction of the United States. He also received the Grand Cross of Honor. J. Edgar Hoover's legacy remains a subject of debate. While he modernized law enforcement and made significant contributions to forensic science, his controversial methods and alleged abuses of power tarnished his reputation. His death on May 2, 1972, marked the end of an era for the FBI. In the years following his passing, revelations about the extent of surveillance and clandestine operations under Hoover's watch continued to surface, further fueling debates about the balance between national security and civil liberties. One of his biographers, Kenneth Ackerman, wrote that the allegation that Hoover's secret files kept presidents from firing him is a myth. However, Richard Nixon was recorded in 1971 as stating that one of the reasons he would not fire Hoover was that he was afraid of Hoover's reprisals against him. Similarly, Presidents Harry Truman and John F. Kennedy considered dismissing Hoover as FBI director, but ultimately concluded that the political cost of doing so would be too great. Hoover personally directed the FBI investigation of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. In 1964, just days before Hoover testified in the earliest stages of the Warren Commission hearings, President Lyndon Johnson waived the then mandatory U.S. government service retirement age of 70, allowing Hoover to remain the FBI director for an indefinite period of time. The House Select Committee on Assassinations issued a report in 1979 critical of the performance by the FBI, the Warren Commission, and other agencies. The report criticized the FBI's, Hoover's, reluctance to investigate thoroughly the possibility of a conspiracy to assassinate the president. Did you know Chief Justice Earl Warren was a Freemason? Don't forget to check out that episode. When Richard Nixon took office in January 1969, Hoover had just turned 74. There was a growing sentiment in Washington, D.C. that the aging FBI chief should retire, but Hoover's power and friends in Congress remained too strong for him to be forced to do so. Hoover remained director of the FBI until he died of a heart attack in his Washington home on May 2, 1972, whereupon operational command of the Bureau was passed on to Associate Director Clyde Tolson. On May 3, 1972, Nixon appointed L. Patrick Gray, a Justice Department official with no FBI experience, as acting director of the FBI, with W. Mark Felt becoming Associate Director. Hoover's body lay in state in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, where Chief Justice Warren Burger eulogized him. Up to that time, Hoover was the only civil servant to have lain in state, according to the New York Daily News. At the time, the New York Times observed that this was an honor accorded to only 21 persons before, of whom 8 were presidents or former presidents. President Nixon delivered another eulogy at the funeral service in the National Presbyterian Church, and called Hoover one of the giants whose long life brimmed over with magnificent achievement and dedicated service to this country, which he loved so well. Hoover was buried in the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., next to the graves of his parents and a sister who had died in infancy. J. Edgar Hoover's life was a complex tapestry of accomplishments, controversies, and secrecy. His impact on law enforcement, the FBI's evolution, and the landscape of American society remains indelible. Yet his legacy is as much a reflection of his successes as it is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the erosion of privacy in the pursuit of security. Hoover's story remains a subject of fascination and scrutiny, continuing to intrigue historians, law enforcement professionals, and the public alike.